walking in a country road, and I've been chasing after my shadow.
Welcome back to the Camino Podcast, episode 107. I'm Dave Whitson.
Nobody asked me my name.
We're just a couple days from Christmas 2025 and the beginning of 2026. So think of this episode as an early present. Getting to spend an hour in conversation with George Greenia certainly was for me. I can run through all the credentials and accomplishments. After all, he's the founder of the Institute for Pilgrimage Studies at William and Mary, as well as the co-founder of their program in Medieval and Renaissance Studies, the longtime editor and publisher of La Crónica, a research journal on medieval Spanish studies, and the recipient of the Compostela Prize in 2019 for his ample contributions to the preservation of European culture. But even as I sit here, clear across the country, I can see him waving his arms as though to move us along from all those petty details and into the heart of the conversation. So who am I to disagree? For more than 30 years, George Greenia has played a central part in the resurgence of the Camino de Santiago, especially here in North America. And he's a man with plenty of stories to share and insights to offer into the larger field of pilgrimage studies. And I've got an hour's worth of those insights coming your way in this last episode of 2025. Dr. George Greenia, or should I say Sir George Greenia?
Thank you, Dave, but I don't use any titles anymore.
You were in fact knighted, is that correct?
That's correct. It happened, some 18 years ago. Because I've worked a lot in promoting Spanish culture, and especially the Camino de Santiago in the United States, I was nominated by Spain's ambassador to the United States for a knighthood. It went back to Madrid. It was approved somehow. And I was knighted as a knight commander in the Order of Isabel the Catholic. So yes, that actually happened.
Did you have to kneel and receive the accolades of the sword on each shoulder, or?
No, and I didn't meet the king in person. It happened at the residence of the ambassador of Spain to the United States in Washington, D.C. It's a cultural honor these days. And it was just presented, in front of 400 people at the residence of the ambassador in Washington, which is really a lot of fun. But you get this great big honking piece of jewelry to wear, and then you're supposed to walk around this cocktail party with this bling, and it's a little embarrassing. It's a little embarrassing as people are always staring at it and they don't know what to say. So no, it was very kind of Spain to do that, and I'm happy to continue promoting the Camino de Santiago and Spanish culture in general.
I have to say, if I were knighted, I would be expecting everyone to call me Sir Dave. So I appreciate your humility.
Dave, you certainly deserve it. It feels like actually a rite of passage that anybody who claims to be serious about pilgrimage and global religious tourism, to meet you, to be interviewed by you, feels like coming of age. So here I am at 75, finally getting one of the biggest accolades an American can receive, and that's talking to Dave Whitson. So thank you.
I think that statement is probably better than being knighted. So I'm just gonna accept it and move on. And what you being knighted is in some ways a culmination, even though it was 18 years ago and plenty has happened since, but a culmination of your contributions to the Camino. So let's go from that point back to the beginning. I'm curious, what is your earliest memory of the Camino de Santiago or Santiago de Compostela? When did you first encounter it that you can recall?
That's a good question. And I guess the emotion connected with that is embarrassment, because an article came out in the Smithsonian magazine in the early 90s, and someone approached me and said, "Oh, look, Camino de Santiago. You're a medievalist specialist in the Middle Ages and Spain. What can you tell me about it?" And I said something like, "I know it was out there." I didn't know very much. And so, but I could see there was more and more questions, more and more interest, more and more penetration in the American public about this Spanish phenomenon. The Brits were covering it too from much closer. And so I started studying up about it, learning about it, doing my research because it was in lots of the books that I had studied for my PhD. And sure enough, the fascination grew. And then one of my closest neighbors, Sandy Lenthal, actually went on the pilgrimage by herself. And she has a terrific story about going on pilgrimage as a mature woman, a woman of a certain age, who decided to, after reading the Smithsonian article, to go to Spain, to do the pilgrimage, to have the experience. And she came back full of wonder about what she had experienced. And that was terrific. So she and I decided to invite pilgrims to Williamsburg, Virginia, and we spread the news by letter and postcard. There was no internet then. In 1998, we had the very first gathering of American pilgrims here, and we hosted, I think, 3 times altogether. And American Pilgrims on the Camino came out of that. They have national gatherings throughout the United States. But the origin story is actually here in Williamsburg, Virginia, sleepy little colonial town with a whole cadre of enthusiasts about the Camino de Santiago. So I was sort of propelled by others to learn more, to understand it. And since then, I've actually done probably 15 Caminos for something like 4,000 miles. The first half on bicycle, the second half, the last 2,000 miles on foot. So it's become part of my life, part of my enthusiasms, I have to say.
What I love about that story as an educator is how it was a student's question that prompted you to go in this direction because so often, right, the perception is that the teacher, the professor, the expert is sort of bequeathing this information, is making all of this possible. But there are so many times in our experience as educators where it is the student curiosity that actually opens up our world in a profound way.
Oh, Dave, that's so true. And you, as a professional historian and educator, know that sometimes the right question in either direction triggers a whole avalanche of associations, of care, of wonder. A good friend of mine, a historian, says that building history is a combination of discipline and imagination. And those are the two critical factors. You want to be disciplined, collect your data, analyze it, catalog it, be faithful to the truths that have come down in material history. But it also requires imagination. And it was the imagination that I needed to fill out, to plump out. And so biking from Paris to Santiago that first time in 98, I learned the texture of the land, the ability to see a church tower in the distance and know that's my next goal. You contemplate differences like the deforestation of Europe, but you also contemplate weather patterns and, frankly, the silence of travel by day and the companionability of resting at night with others who are also on the road with you. So those rhythms of travel, of experience, of silence, and then talking about your experiences of the day by day, with people who have shared the same food, the same weather, the same distances, the same shelter, the same hospitality. Ah, now your imagination has something to work on.
I suspect you may have already touched on this moment, but I still want to ask the follow-up, which is at what point, once you were exposed to the Camino and you started diving into it, at what point did you realize that the Camino was going to have a significant ongoing presence in your life? That this wasn't just a one-off, this wasn't a temporary thing, but this was now going to be a through line.
Another good question. And I guess it starts again in embarrassment. I, I remember the very first time I presented myself for a stamp in my pilgrim's passport, my credencial, and it was at the Cathedral of Notre Dame in Paris. And here I'm speaking my imperfect French and saying aloud in French, Je suis pèlerin, I'm a pilgrim. And I felt like such a fraud. The first time was always the hardest. But by the time I got to Santiago and having said that again and again in French and in Spanish and in English, it became part of my identity. I accepted that as part of who I was then and probably who I was going to be from that moment on. And that, again, is a true, well imagined medieval experience. When you look at pilgrim remains in pilgrim cemeteries, they're still dressed in their pilgrim outfit, even though they only wear those clothes, had the walking stick, those boots, that hat during the journey. That's how they wanted to present themselves to God in death. And so, gosh, I realized that I was acquiring an identity that would last personally, but also as an educator, as a historian, as a researcher. So I was grateful for that as something that launched me and settled into place. And then, admittedly, I started packing it into all the courses I taught. There has to be a chapter on the Camino de Santiago, on medieval pilgrimage, on travel for transformation. So, yes, there are various launch points, but it's settled into a career, an identity, something to share with others that others took to even more readily than medieval Spanish literature, which is still my my professional qualification.
It's interesting how some identities are temporary and some are permanent. Like I think about the fact that I haven't been in the classroom for a year and a half now, and I don't know what will happen moving forward, but still the way I introduce myself to others is as a high school teacher, first and foremost. That is the starting point for my identity. But Pilgrim is an enduring part of that as well. Like I don't see that as a temporary thing, that is a marker that I carry forward, a distinction permanently.
That's terrific. Although it hurts me to hear you say you've been out of the classroom for a year and a half. What a loss to your students. I hope you return soon for their sake. I'm sure glad that you're the educator bringing this podcast and so much more in your writings, in your musings, in your audio and video. This is just a wonderful gift to the world, Dave. So thank you.
Thank you again. You know, one of the things that delayed me reaching out to you to talk to for the podcast is the fact that, unlike seemingly everyone else who has walked the Camino, you haven't written a book about your personal relationship, your experience with the Camino. And this is, as you said, 30 years now, 30 plus years of experience with it. So I'm curious, why is it that you haven't done that? Is it something you're not interested in doing, period? Is it something that you're sort of thinking about in the background? How do you conceive of that possibility?
That's that's another very good question. And for some people it would be embarrassing. It's not for me. I've deliberately chosen not to write a book length project on the Camino de Santiago, in part because there are a number of really excellent things out there already before I got into this and have been appearing steadily since. Also, a book is a big project. I've always preferred articles because the dissemination is so much more rapid. If you encourage people to read something, at least it's short. You're not demanding too much of their time. And well, also because I'm interested in a lot of projects about the Camino de Santiago, and they're handled more compactly in a single article, which can go online and be shared with many people at once. Frankly, and you won't be disheartened to hear this, there are many books that frankly should have been articles. A lot of times, a great idea doesn't need to be played out at length. And I earned full professor at my university decades ago. I didn't need to do a book in order for professional advancement. So, free of that responsibility, I could go from project to project, especially since I get a lot of invitations for speaking engagements. I can field test my ideas before a live audience and get terrific, crucial feedback to refine, to revise, to reassess, to correct, to abandon certain ideas that actually sort of ran aground after a talk or two. So I'm happy not having written a book about this and it's sort of put that on everybody's shelves, probably unread. So
It is hard to get eyes on a book these days. That is the truth.
They're difficult to publish as well.
Yep. I have one last sort of big picture question about your relationship with the Camino, and then we'll get more granular. And this feels like just sort of a stereotypical icebreaker question. I'm almost embarrassed to ask it, but once I thought of it, I couldn't get rid of it. If you were to write a book, which you're not going to do, but if you were to write a book about your life on the Camino, what would be the climax? What is sort of like the pivotal dramatic moment as you've gone through the years? You had the starting point where you donned the pilgrim identity. Moving forward from there, what's a defining event in your life on the Camino?
All right, it's walking into the cathedral at Santiago de Compostela.
That
If
makes
I wrote
sense.
a book, it would be the material history of the experience of doing a pilgrimage from the very earliest days, and I'm talking fourth century with Egeria in her pilgrimage to Jerusalem and the Holy Land. But then for the medieval pilgrim going to Santiago, what did they eat? What did they wear? What were the weather patterns? What were the dangers of the road? What were the things that they touched, carried with them? Pilgrims were many things, carriers of disease, but
Mhm.
also transmitters of relics. What was the physical, material, bodily experience of medieval pilgrims and then early modern pilgrims and now modern pilgrims when you walk into the Cathedral of Santiago, and that would be my last chapter, what do you carry with you on your body? The dust, the weariness, the aches, the scars from blisters, the memories as well. What is the accumulation of experience of having done a pilgrimage? Material history and emotional history.
Hmm.
And that, I think, would be my concluding chapter. You, modern pilgrim, walking into the cathedral, what do you carry with you historically and personally from your individual trip? And how does that fill your life now? Because the resonance out from that experience will echo into your professional life, your relationships, your spirituality, your sense of history. Okay, Dave, don't push me in this direction, but yeah, that's the book I would write. How you carry a pilgrimage on your body, in your soul, for longer than the trip could have taken.
I would absolutely buy George Greenia reworking Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried as a pilgrimage work. I would enjoy that,
Thanks, Dave. Thank you.
but you're not going to. So we will move on from that. I want to ask you a question specifically about the TED Talk that you gave. There's a line in it in which you say, pilgrimage has always been a poor vehicle for indoctrination. It's a line that caught me off guard. It comes within a larger context in that presentation where you're talking about a personal story of yours about judging another pilgrim. Could we start with you just sort of talking more, fleshing out that the idea you have behind that statement? Pilgrimage has always been a poor vehicle for indoctrination.
Thank you. I believe that more firmly than ever, that the traveling pilgrim does go from place to place. Within Christian Europe, certainly in the Middle Ages, you would be stopping at shrine sites and convents and monasteries and chapels where you would get spiritual refreshment, hospitality, kindness, liturgies, prayer opportunities, and so on. But during the day, during the long stretches of your waking hours, you're just traveling and traveling with other pilgrims who may be spiritually motivated or not at all. Don't forget that pilgrims shared roads with merchants, with craftsmen, with messengers, with ambassadors, with soldiers, with brigands. A lot of times you're walking with just the local folks herding their cattle or moving a hay wain to a different site. Who you talk to in the course of the day, this sort of churning conversation that is as steady as your footfalls, well, that's not indoctrination. This is sort of the churn of community conversation. And you will get reinforced on the great goals, the noble goals of your journey when you stop by night. But an awful lot happens during the day. And even the spiritual message will change for each place that you stop along the way. It will be modulated, it will be refocused on a particular saint, on a devotion to the Virgin Mary, on healing powers of that shrine, or none at all. And that's one of the great distinguishing factors of the Camino de Santiago and the goal of the Camino, the cathedral in Santiago. It wasn't a curative shrine. You don't go there for any special benefit, except perhaps salvation itself. There's actually some good work being done right now on the Camino de Santiago and the Cathedral of Santiago as one of the trigger forces for the Catholic conception of purgatory. How do you redeem yourself from the sins that you've done during your life? Well, your goal, your endpoint life, this pilgrimage, is to present yourself to St. James, who might plead for you before God himself. He was one of the inner circle of Jesus Christ during his ministry on earth. And maybe pleading with him will help relieve your burden of sins of your whole life. And that's the cure that shrine offers. And not something simple like blindness or pregnancy or any of the other, mundane, workaday miracles that other people hope for and might pick up along the way.
I was curious about that statement. I want it to be true. I like the idea of it, and I see your argument. Where I struggled with it was when I think about all of the conversations that take place on the trail, or a lot of the conversations that take place on the trail, and then certainly also in Camino forums. It seems like there's a lot of, self-indoctrination when it comes to the idea of who is a real pilgrim, how the walk should be done. It can feel quite dogmatic in the conversations about exactly how we should be doing this the correct way to approach the Camino. What do you make of that and how it fits into your larger point?
I'll start out by correcting something that I may have misrepresented in a way. Yes, there are conversations that happen along the trail, but the baseline experience of medieval travel was silence. Conversation, perhaps, when you met somebody, if you shared a common language, frankly.
Yeah.
And if you're doing any sort of long distance travel, say to Rome, to Jerusalem especially, a lot of the time was silent because you didn't share a language. You may not have shared a faith tradition. And especially if you're on board a ship, you're below decks. Don't forget that traveling pilgrims on ships during the Middle Ages, there may be a ship loaded with pilgrims, but the ship's captain simply thinks of them as self-loading cargo. They are paid passengers, and all right, he can ship them to a destination, well, they're trade ships and whatnot, but they're self-loading cargo, frankly, and they are out of the way of the operations of the sailors staffing the boat itself. So there's an awful lot of conversation among a pilgrim band who may set out and share safety of numbers and whatnot. But there's an awful lot of silence in that journey as well. As for the modern, the contrast to the modern period, we are word saturated nowadays, online, in videos, heaven's sakes, in podcasts, where talk and language and debate and competing ideas are everywhere around us. Silence is extremely rare in our modern world. Solitude is now hard to come by on the Camino de Santiago. One of the things I'd like to bring up to modern pilgrims is, first couple of times I walked the Camino de Santiago, I saw people with headsets, earbuds, or the old Walkman with the wires and the whole bit. So, I asked them later on, what were you listening to? What's your playlist for pilgrimage? And each time I asked somebody that, they said, I didn't have the thing on. I was just trying to avoid intrusive conversations. And I get it. Too many pilgrims are altogether too chatty. And if you want solitude, you're going to have to send out some sort of signal to fend people off. We joke among Catholic circles that the most effective technique of all is to pull out a rosary and hold it in your hand. It even scares the hardcore Catholics away. And if you really need to scare people away, just mutter under your breath, Jesus. And then people will avoid you like the plague. Nowadays, saturated with talk, with opinion, with points of view, with online access, with frankly too many books, a lot of them self-published and rather repetitive, I'm afraid, based on only a single experience on the Camino. We don't get the solitude, we don't get the interiority, we don't get the impact that certain conversations will have on us because they stand out as a rare peak event. And so the conversations, many of the conversations I've had that punctuate my day as a generally silent pilgrim have had a transformative power because there was nothing to cloud them. There was no debris surrounding them. They were unique structures that embedded in my memory, and I treasured them for how they erupted into solitude and gave me something to carry with me into my next hour of quiet walking.
That makes sense. As someone who spent 6 months walking routes in Italy this year and didn't spend more than 3 hours walking on the trail with other pilgrims, what you said rings true about the impact then of the human encounters that I had along the way, that they carried greater potency. They stick in my memory in ways that doesn't happen when you're sort of going from one person to another to another to another.
I think you said it better than I could. Those incessant conversations are sort of the acoustic clutter around you that you'd like to sweep away. And if you had all that time in quiet by yourself to contemplate what you've seen, what you've tasted, what you've felt on your body, you're a lucky man.
As a medievalist, something you didn't just point out to me in our communication, but earnestly warned me about, you obviously have an essential perspective on the history of the Camino, even if it didn't come into your frame of reference until the 1990s. The Camino was born in the midst of your era. At the same time, popular understanding of medieval European history has tailed off. I know that in each of the high schools that I have taught at, medieval history is basically gone from the curriculum. It's not really talked about. There's been a shift more towards contemporary modernity the last couple hundred years. I wonder if you might spotlight, and you've already touched on a couple of like really interesting connections, but I wonder if you might spotlight one or two critical aspects of medieval history that are essential or just really valuable to know if we're to better understand the emergence and development of the Camino de Santiago.
Okay, then I'll confess why I got into medieval studies in the first place. And it's because back in the 1970s and 80s, I couldn't get a PhD in science fiction. The trouble is, if you reach deeper into antiquity, the Greeks and the Romans, we have presumed Renaissance forward that they're us, just in different togas. We have recreated Greece and Rome in our own image and likeness. It's the Middle Ages, a term of disuse and disrespect, those Middle Ages where nothing happened. There was Greece and Rome, and then there's us.
At least it's not the Dark Ages.
Yeah, the Dark Ages, a term that was only invented a little over a century ago to talk about a period that was still dark for us. It's not dark anymore. We've done our homework. We know a lot more about that period. So no professional uses Dark Ages anymore. That's sort of an admission that I don't know anything about it. But the Middle Ages, you've got, and this is my field of historical inquiry, the years 500 to 1500. I've got 1,000 years with an incredible variety of social structures, of presumptions about the planet, of religious beliefs, of local economies, of power structures. These are the aliens of my science fiction world. These are the folks who present a huge variety of life experiences that I couldn't have imagined for myself. They say the most interesting part of any science fiction, book of science fiction, is the first 50 pages. That's when you set up the world about the physics, the creatures, the relationships, whether there are three sexes or four rather than just two. how they relate to each other, what they eat, how they fight, how they get embarrassed, how they socialize. It's creating the world that intrigues me and recreating the medieval worlds. It's certainly not one. Oh gosh, that's what's so fascinating. It really is science fiction, but it really happened. And there's no use saying that those folks back in the 12th century or 13th century really weren't us. They were us. They're smart, they're capable, they're deft, they're scrappy, they're given to violence, and they're given to spiritual aspirations. All those things are true. And it gives us a point of perspective about who we could be if we wanted to. It's the full repertoire of human experience by country, by language, by polity, by life experience, by treasuring the fragile nature of life, which we have tended to forget about. Life truly is fragile. Our lifespan is longer, but we're just as fragile as organisms. And they certainly knew that in the Middle Ages. You know, the most common feature of medieval pilgrimage trails after chapels, churches, monasteries, convent were graveyards. It's guesswork, but maybe 10 to 15% of all pilgrims who went on a long distance journey never made it home again. And one of my colleagues in the law school here, who does property law, he also has a PhD in medieval history, studies how travelers facing a prolonged absence, merchants and pilgrims, military as well, how did they secure their property for a long absence? And how months or years later was that property unsecured when everyone realized they're never coming back? They've died somewhere along the way. It happened on the Camino de Santiago. It happened on the pilgrimage trails to Rome. It certainly happened on the ship voyages to Jerusalem and the Holy Land, and they vanished without a trace. I was just reading a pilgrimage account of 12 pilgrim ships leaving from Venice, sailing out the Adriatic on into the Mediterranean. Of those 12, 11 went down in the same storm.
Wow.
The 12th had a pilgrim who wrote about the other 11 ships that were lost. All those pilgrims are gone. We've got no pilgrim narratives from those lost folks. His narrative survives, and it's a very full one, and it's dazzling, but you realize how many people were lost along the way. So when I say there were chapels and churches and monasteries and convents all along the pilgrimage trails, that's a stacked experience because in every one of those places were also pilgrim burials. Pilgrims knew at every place they stopped that they might be given, if necessary, not just shelter, but burial, and a reverent burial as a sacred traveler. And that, I think, is an intriguing reminiscence of mortality for every traveler along the pilgrimage trails. That I'm stopping at a place where, frankly, I know travelers like me have died and have been given respectful burial and prayer. And that's one of the reassurances of the trail that we've lost, knowing that wherever I stop, whoever welcomes me would also probably be willing to bury me if it came to that.
It's something that I think about sometimes that it certainly does take courage to go off on the Camino, especially your first time. It takes courage to put yourself to that physical challenge, maybe to leave a country for the first time, to go to Spain for the first time, to think about all of the things, the obligations you are leaving behind, children, spouses, work commitments, your home, all of those different things. It takes courage to do it today. But how different was it when you were leaving and you knew death was possible? You knew that this wasn't a 5 week thing. It could be a multi-year thing, especially, I think about pilgrims to Rome. They had to time it out to get over the Alps when there was snow, and that's just a reality. So if you went down one year, you were probably waiting until deep into the next year to make it home. So even in the best case scenario, You're gone from home for a really long time. And of course, there's no phones, there's no email. You are gone, gone. And you are leaving your loved ones completely off on their own. What kind of courage did that require to set off on that journey?
Oh, precisely. And that's why in the Middle Ages, before you set off on a trip like this, and it was more men on long distance pilgrimage, women were predominantly the pilgrims on short distance pilgrimages to the next village over on the way to the market. You stop at a holy well, a shrine, a chapel. You pray to a saint venerated in some church nearby. But on long distance pilgrimage, it was men for the most part, and they needed permission from their feudal lord, if there was one, from city authorities, because they're abandoning their duties for mutual defense in case the city was attacked, for public works projects that everybody had to pitch in for. You needed the permission of not only civil authorities, but of the church, because you couldn't walk away from a relationship that you wanted to escape, from family obligations to debts to care of children that you had sired. There are all sorts of strictures that would keep a person at home. And once released, perhaps forever, have you secured your obligations here for city, for family, for church that you had undertaken as an adult in this community? So, going on pilgrimage, you wrote a will and testament before you left because it was a practical necessity. And also, boy, there's nothing to give you religion like making out a will. And actually, at one of our pilgrimages, my husband and I, it was the moment we were finishing wills and concluding documents. And I thought, this is a true medieval experience. You always made out a will before you left on a long distance pilgrimage.
It actually strikes me as a really interesting way to set off on pilgrimage or a step to take before going, because it immediately triggers this deeply reflective mindset, thinking about your life as a whole, the people who are closest to you, how it stands and how you might like it to be before that will would actually be carried out.
We talk about the variable piety of the medieval pilgrim, and that's true. But there's nothing like going on a long distance journey, knowing that there's a good chance you will never come home again, to up the valence of the import, the impact of, I might die on this trip. And death touched pilgrims in many ways. Simple starvation, certainly disease, the attack by wolves and other beasts. I read another pilgrim account recently where pilgrims are traveling along. They did leave this record, and they saw buzzards flying over a spot out in the fields. They approached. It was a pilgrim too far gone to do anything for him or even to collect identification. And so they had to simply walk on and leave the body there. There were constant reminders, not just at burial sites, but on the road, of the vulnerability of the traveler. So, will that help you get religion? Yeah, it sure will. When it's a nearly daily occurrence, you're reminded of the fragileness of your own life and the mortality of everyone traveling with you. There are advantages, of course, of traveling like this. Your companions of the trail, many of them will be charitably inclined, and there are places of hospitality, because how much can you carry with you? Either you're a big, wealthy person with a whole entourage and pack animals, or you're traveling with a small band of others who have basically a light pack. Medieval pilgrims never carried more than maybe 10 pounds of everything, including their clothes, with them. And their clothes were mostly wool. Practicality, common thing to make clothes out of, much cheaper than linen or cotton. And also, we like to joke, wool is the miracle microfiber of the Middle Ages. That is to say, if you've ever been caught in a rainstorm with a cotton t-shirt, you know it gets cold right away. It's chilly. Whereas wool warms even when wet. It's not only durable, it's the most practical thing you can wear on yourself. Other than that, there's a little bag with perhaps papers, perhaps foodstuffs, perhaps some identification, tokens of faith and religion, perhaps a contact relic that's been touched to other relics. But medieval pilgrims traveled light. They traveled in groups for safety, but boy, did they travel light. And in wool, the miracle microfiber of the Middle Ages.
And we've just rebranded it as Smart Wool, but it's still good. So let's shift over to contemporary now and talk about the other big thread that I wanted to explore with you. You are the founder of William and Mary's Institute for Pilgrimage Studies, the world's only such institute.
That's correct.
What was the original vision behind this? What did you set out to accomplish?
Okay, I'm going to be a traitor to the cause here. And I want you to know, of course, it started with the Camino de Santiago because there's a huge national interest in this. This is a growth industry. And frankly, nation states have noticed. Global religious tourism and pilgrimage are the most recession-proof forms of discretionary travel in the 21st century. They are a cash cow, and people will go on these trips despite personal finances, the threat of war, disease, all sorts of inconveniences and difficulties. But people do this nowadays. And the Camino de Santiago has become the global model for successful pilgrimage. Like I said, it's a cash cow. The economic benefits for Spain are vast. There are 27 countries in Europe who have voluntarily blazed and marked trails pointing towards Spain on their own lands, directing people off to another country. Spain thinks this is just great. Thank you very much. Point people in our direction. But what I've been doing at the Institute for Pilgrimage Studies is also try to decaminoize our operation. Although the Camino de Santiago is the prestige model around the world, there are other pilgrimages, of course, much larger, much more populated. In terms of a national operation, a national investment in something, the Camino de Santiago really does set the model for South Africa, for Australia, even for Japan. The only place that doesn't need us is India, which has hundreds of millions of people traveling internally, not across borders. So the Camino de Santiago is the model, but I want people to use it as a point of reference to understand pilgrimage in Taiwan, in Australia, in India, in Brazil, in Chile, in Peru. This really is a model that gives us a touch point for understanding and living through other pilgrimages. Because we've joked for decades that once you've done one Camino, you're always between Caminos. Well, you're between pilgrimages as well. And at one point, folks in Ireland said, oh no, we're starting more Irish pilgrimages to kill off the Camino de Santiago. People should pilgrimage here. And actually, we laugh at it now on both sides, both in Spain and in Ireland, that whether you do a pilgrimage for St. Patrick first or the Camino first, you'll probably do both of them at some point. So it's a self-perpetuating, a self-nourishing breeder reactor for pilgrimage. And it has a multiplying effect. If you have a wonderful experience, you'll go back again, and probably with others, because you want to share this experience with a loved one, with children, with parents, with good friends, with people who would get it. And boy, are we desirable tourists. We have a very small carbon footprint once we get there. We want to understand a culture from within, not just the bars, the beaches, the big cities, but we favor the interior. We patronize mom and pop operations, bakeries, grocery stores, fruit stands, and not the corporate chains. We don't spend as much day by day, but we're there longer. And the impressions, the memories, the commitment that we feel carries home with us. So I'm trying to decaminoize our Institute for Pilgrimage Studies. And we do have things about Taiwan and California and Florida and Texas and Quebec in Canada, but frequently helping us understand them in the light of the Camino de Santiago, which It's not just a prestige model in terms of economic benefit, but for purity of the experience. People would like to offer a Camino experience. And Camino, as a vocabulary item, has become a branding term. Australia has like 5 of them, which they call Caminos, which is an implicit promise of a transcendent experience like one would have in Spain. So this is an intriguing sort of propagation of an ideal across the world. So the Camino de Santiago, frankly, it's half of all the presentations we have at our annual symposium, but we look at that as one example, and there are competing or complementary examples in other cultures, in other historical moments, and we should respect those as well.
For those of us outside of William and Mary, the most visible part of the Institute is the annual symposium, which has been held since 2011. So you're coming up on your 15th anniversary.
Yes, that's true.
I think this gives you a distinct perspective on the state of pilgrimage research. And part of the answer to this question is probably the broadening of the focus beyond just the Camino. But I still want to ask the question, how have you seen the field shift or evolve over the past 15 years? What are the kinds of things people are exploring now or talking about that they maybe weren't when you started this 15 years ago?
20, 30 years ago, when people started professionally talking about research and pilgrimage studies, there was a high sense of territorialism among methodologies. People in sociology had their point of view, and people in anthropology theirs. And literally, when people in religious studies would come in and talk about pilgrimage, academics in other fields would wait until they left. And then they said, now we can get down to the real work. They weren't taken seriously. Nowadays, pilgrimage studies has established itself as a field without a home. We have no department in which we're exclusively lodged. There's no one set of lenses or methodologies for understanding pilgrimage.
It's a genuinely interdisciplinary field. It goes away from the traditional model of siloed departments.
Exactly. That's exactly it, Dave. No, I have 25 faculty in 15 different departments within my university that look at pilgrimage studies. They go from kinesiology and physiological changes as you travel to the law school and securing property in medieval times to international studies about international law and freedom of movement. How do you credential yourself as a pilgrim and not as a migrant trying to establish yourself in another country? I mean, migratory laws are part of this. It's land use. It's taking eminent domain to create a pilgrimage trail. It's art history. It's religious history. It's, gosh, so many fields that are not competing but complementing each other. We've actually learned, I think, more humility about our sociology, our anthropology, or our history, religious studies, listening to one another. And I think this is really healthy for academics and their students to see how much goes on within the vast field of pilgrimage studies and how badly we need the art historians, the religious scholars, the anthropologists to process what's going on in my day-to-day travel as a walking pilgrim.
If you were just starting your career right now, what's the big question or issue or topic you would love to explore in this field?
Oh gosh, that's too big for me to answer. Because I can't guess what my aspirations would be if I was starting over again. I would like a job. The Camino has great traction because there's so much interest. It's a way of communicating medieval studies to a modern audience. I've only been really looked to and consulted as a medievalist a few times in my entire career. One was in 1999, as we were about to approach the new millennium, and people were asking, wow, what was it like in the year 1000 compared to the year 2000? And I had to tell people, mostly people didn't notice because there was no uniform calendar that everyone looked to at the same time. It was mostly the year of the king's reign or a pope's reign, or how long the bishop has been in power. It was very a local calendar. It was a seasonal calendar for an agrarian society. And then again, I was consulted during COVID, and people would ask me, it's just like the medieval plague, right? I had to tell them again, no, actually not. People aren't dying quite as quickly and in the same numbers. And there are ways that we can challenge this and protect ourselves. We have a much better understanding of disease. But now, when people ask about pilgrimage, I think it's a more durable field for me. I'm glad to be in it. Actually, true confessions, Dave, I wish all this had happened about 30 years ago. I'm getting too old to keep up with everything that's happening. As a scholar as well, the volume of research being pumped out in tourism studies, in historical studies, in religious studies is vast. And okay, I'll go back to your previous point. I don't want to write another book to burden people with. There's so much out there. The world is so rich with scholarship and thought and actually dedication to pilgrimage studies that it's now a playground that we can welcome so many people into. When we have our annual conference, we have 30, 35, 40 presenters. We have that many again who have come just to listen to the presentations. And they're terrific working artists, working novelists, working politicians. How do we make this a safe environment? And frankly, among the stakeholders in any modern pilgrimage are government officials who have to make sure that there's transportation, a safety net, medical assistance when needed. It's a dangerous world. Goals of pilgrimage and pilgrims on the trails are a soft target for terrorists. We need protection as well as public services. But then there's tour providers who I'm not pissed at, I'm not upset with. They make pilgrimage accessible to more people than it's ever been in history. So these are all good developments that now I'm participating in a much wider world than that of medieval studies. And that's pretty satisfying to know that our reach has broadened out beautifully and we're at service to more people than ever before.
I'm sure you have also worked with, supported, mentored a whole generation of emerging scholars in the field. I wonder if you might, obviously you can't exhaustively approach this, but I wonder if you might spotlight a couple of colleagues, emerging scholars who are doing really interesting work in the field that might be of interest to a more mainstream. Not everyone wants to go and consume academic journal writing, but some of it is quite accessible and even on occasion pleasant to read.
There's a number of people who are doing cross-cultural studies in pilgrimage. Matthew Anderson in Nova Scotia at Antigonish. Matthew Anderson's a brilliant conversationalist and scholar about pilgrimage, both ancient and modern. And he's done a number of pilgrimages, my gosh, in Norway, in Hungary, in Germany, in Canada, where it's recovery of national history as well. So Matthew Anderson is just brilliant. One of the students that I took with me after his freshman year of college, Danny Heber is now a well-known linguistics communicator. His research project on the Camino de Santiago was linguistic negotiation. Because if you've got a couple old ladies from Finland, only one of whom speaks German, and has to look for someone else who speaks German along the trail to ask someone in Spanish about lodging or medicine. All right, how do people negotiate across multiple modern languages along the pilgrimage trail? And what are their strategies for collaboration? On that experience of the Camino de Santiago and knowing he could live out of his backpack, Danny spent a whole year in Kenya, first learning Swahili and then studying national language policy in Nairobi in the Highlands. So Danny is another one. Daniel Olson at Brigham Young University does pilgrimage studies and helping to recover pilgrimage as an operative metaphor for the Church of Latter-day Saints, for the Mormons, who have long practiced forms of pilgrimage on their Founders' Day, but never used that terminology. So Daniel Olson is doing brilliant work in pilgrimage studies out of Brigham Young University. So that's terrific. And then there's also John Moore at the University of Alabama, Birmingham. He invited me to accompany him going on the Trail of Tears with the Cherokee Nation to recover a memory of the Trail of Tears, but walking it not from east to west, sunset, death, exile, but from west toward the east.
Mm.
That's to say, a recovery, a homecoming toward a rising sun and rebirth. And the Cherokee, Chickasaw, and other nations of that area in Alabama knew they had a valuable experience. It was a heritage event for them, but they didn't have the language or the terminology to sort of communicate it, record it for themselves, and spread it to others. So we were invited along as scholars, as researchers, but also as conversationalists. This is language you could use to describe your experience on the Trail of Tears. There's 100 of these across the world now, where pilgrimage is providing a vocabulary for experiences, some without ever leaving home, interior, emotional, spiritual pilgrimages, which can still learn from traveling pilgrimages, like on the Camino de Santiago.
You've mentioned that the Camino is a prestige model for global pilgrimage, and also that global pilgrimage is thriving. There are all of these different routes already established or new ones being developed. As you've looked at and gotten to know these pilgrimages outside of the Camino, sure, there's plenty for all of those other routes to borrow, copy, be inspired by when it comes to the Camino. Are there lessons that the Camino could be learning from some of these other pilgrimages? Could this go both ways?
Yes, certainly. Everyone complains about the commercialization and the massification of the Camino de Santiago. There's too many people out there. Well, people have been telling me that for over 30 years. Already in the 1990s, people were telling me, oh, the Camino is dead. There's too many people. They're trying to sell you stuff. There's competition for places to stay and places to eat. And well, pilgrims have needs. We need to sleep someplace. We need to buy food, for heaven's sakes. We need protection. We need guidance. We need signage. My answer for all of them has always been the same when people complain that the Camino is dead. If you want a transcendent experience, provide one for someone else. If you want something uplifting, something memorable, something that will etch into your soul, provide that for someone else. And so the Camino is learning, I think, from other trails, less provisioned trails in Italy, in France, in England, in Ireland, in Mexico, in Brazil, that what can I do for others with less equipped paths before me? How can I help them and enhance the experience for myself? I really like a model that I heard about for Brazil, where people start out on a training Camino for the Camino de Santiago. They have local trails that will buff you up for doing the Camino in Spain. But those pilgrims deliberately start out with a vastly overpacked backpack, deliberately setting out it's too much.
I think that's called hazing.
No, as they deliberately, as they go from poor village to poor village to poor village, they shed the things that they've packed to give away. The
Oh,
goal is to arrive with almost nothing, with your identification, and really your backpack should be empty. And that's a real goal for pilgrimage, to arrive as you will arrive in heaven, naked as you were born. I have a Franciscan background, and my goal is to die naked. Uh, that is to say, to give away everything we have. And that will uplift your spirit. And that is one of the great operational mechanisms of pilgrimage that you shed as you go. You realize there are things you don't need, and you realize there are things that you're packing and carrying that are more burdens than helps. So give away everything, and give yourself away. If you want a transcendent experience, offer one to someone else.
I like that the conversation started with you talking about your interest in the things that people carried. And now we're talking about the things that we're shedding along the way. So coming all the way back around. The last question I wanted to ask you about the Institute is when I saw you talking a little bit about the background on the Institute, one of the first things you highlighted was a focus on motivation, studying the motivation underlying pilgrimage. Have you seen any change? Are the deeper motivations behind why people go on pilgrimage today consistent with medieval pilgrims? Are they consistent with pilgrims 20 years ago? Is there a universality here, or are we seeing things shift over time?
That's a question with great subtlety, because in the Middle Ages, certainly everybody's announced intention was pretty uniform. That, yes, I'm going to visit the shrine of St. James or some other sacred site to ask for a favor, to pray for my spiritual enhancement, whatever. Nowadays, there's a lot of variety of why you're going on pilgrimage. And that very confusion, that very variety, that very indecisiveness is an advantage because people are welcomed in under any sort of motivation. Oh, it's just cultural history. The University of Michigan School of Architecture does the Camino de Santiago as an architectural history grand tour. That's perfectly fine. But people who go for one announced reason, even those who insist that it's not spiritual, I don't go to any church. It's funny when people of religious inclination settle in for the evening and start to talk about spirituality or longings or doubts or intimations of what they're really hoping this pilgrimage will give them. It's the people who are most insistent that they don't do religion or church who start to lean in to listen, to capture some of that conversation. And eavesdropping is perfectly fine. Listen to what other people have to say. In the privacy of the albergue, of the pilgrim shelter, when we're just talking to each other, not under the oversight of any religious authority, but this is frankly me from the heart. Those conversations are invaluable, and they only happen when you don't pick the private B&B, the little hotel, the time apart. No, you got to stay with pilgrims. I stay in pilgrim shelters every chance I get to be with fellow pilgrims. Why are you walking? This is why I'm walking. And I keep on joking when people ask me, well, who's on the days? And it's everything from industrial strength Catholics to mainline denominations, Episcopalians, Lutherans, Methodists, they're all there, to people with aromas, crystals, and grudges against their former churches. And frankly, they're all pilgrims. And I admire what the Cathedral in Santiago, how they receive people. Anybody who walks through the door, whether they've just come off the trail or come off an airplane or a bus, is a pilgrim. You are all equal when you walk through the cathedral doors. So we're back to the Cathedral of Santiago. You walk through the doors carrying your life experiences, whether you carry them on a plane or along with your backpack. When you arrive, you present not just your ideas or your receptive faculties, but I carry my whole body with me. It's dust, it's fatigue, it's weariness, it's sunburn, it's blisters, it's memories. So what do people offer when you come to Santiago? I offer this package, this whole package, and everything that it's acquired during the course of this trip. So pilgrimage is a great refreshment and not just an experience.
Perfect note to end on. Sir George Greenia, thank you very much.
Sir Dave Whitson, thank you very much.
That'll do it for 2025. My walking focus this year was mostly in Italy, which was celebrating a jubilee, but the pilgrims continued flocking to Spain as well. By the end of November, nearly 530,000 pilgrims had already received their Compostelas. Tack on all the other pilgrims who didn't collect a Compostela, those who reached Santiago and opted out, or those who walked the Camino but didn't arrive in Santiago. And maybe you're at 2/3 maybe more. Beyond that, the Camino continues to push further and further into mainstream culture as massive travel publishers Lonely Planet and DK joined Moon this year with Camino guides of their own. Bill Bennett's The Way, My Way took the world by storm, and reports continue to trickle out regarding part 2 of The Way. All of that happened as the Camino was literally on fire back in August. The Camino Invierno got hit the hardest, but walkers throughout the region saw their pilgrimages put on hold for a brief spell. And unfortunately, there's probably more to come. All those eucalyptus plantations or tinderboxes, especially as temperatures climb. And in the meantime, debates continue about development of industrial facilities encroaching on the Camino, and rougher stretches of the route that are maybe more atmospheric, like the infamous Dragon's Teeth leading into Zubiri, being redeveloped for more accessible, less hazardous, maybe less memorable walking. Continued growth is never guaranteed, but with the next whole year just around the corner in 2027, I think we can expect to see these numbers continue to climb for quite a while. And some assorted growing pains are likely to continue as a consequence. When I start to get caught up in all the potential downsides associated with that, crowds, congestion, excessive commercialization, and the like, I have to stop and remind myself that out of all the things people could be pursuing in 2026, I sure would rather they invest their time, money, and emotional capital in the Camino than most of the others out there. That's all for this episode. Thanks again to George Greenia. You can find his long list of articles and accolades on his William and Mary faculty page, including a number of direct article downloads, and you can find a range of presentations he has delivered over the years on YouTube, because 1 hour is not enough, nowhere near enough. All episodes of the Camino Podcast can be found on Spotify, Apple, SoundCloud, and YouTube. You can reach me at CaminoPodcast@gmail.com and through the Camino Podcast Facebook page, and you can support the pod on Patreon at patreon.com/Dave Whitson. Plenty to come in 2026.
Maybe my baby will never see me